been keeping up with my series of Doctor Who reviews detailing my history as a Doctor Who fan, you can probably guess where we go from here. So, after talking about the first David Tennant story, we might as well continue on with Matt Smith's debut, The 11th Hour. By the end of the fourth series, or Series 30, the popularity of Doctor Who just exploded worldwide. Finally, what was once a derided show that was shunned for being cheesy and of dubious quality was rapidly becoming a cultural phenomenon. While many classic Who fans loved it for the nostalgia, new fans looked upon the show as something new and unique, but it was something they could share with their parents and grandparents whom enjoyed the show in their youth. And a lot of that credit had to go to the dynamic performance of David Tennant. For as much as I bellyache that his popularity has effectively spoiled the show for every actor who came before and after him, David Tennant helped Doctor Who become something that it had never been before. Cool. Suddenly, Geek Chic was born, Converse All-Stars was selling like crazy, and there was this active campaign for Tennant to run the Olympic torch in 2012. So for me, it was incredible seeing all this love for this show, which was only a few short years prior when I told people that this was my favorite show, and people looked at me like a Christian who actually abides by the teaching of their religion. Unlike, this guy. So it was great seeing all the outpouring of love for the show, which, credit where it's due, Tennant and RTD played a large role in cultivating. But all things must end, as both Tennant and RTD were leaving the show. And it was a no-brainer that Stephen Moffat should take over, given that he had written some of the most popular episodes from each of the 4 prior seasons, and also has considerable experience as a showrunner with fantastic shows, like Jekyll, and more importantly, Coupling, a show which is like Friends, only, funny, sexy, and with likable characters, and balanced storylines that doesn't devote the entire thing to the lame will they won't they story arc pertaining to 2 people who really should never breed, let alone hook up. Yes, I was never a fan. Moffat had enough cred to take the reins from Russell T Davies, but his first major decision was enough to get people raising a brow. The public scrutiny surrounding Tennant's successor was crazy, and people were wondering if Moffat was going to go with a major celebrity for the role, someone with massive worldwide acclaim, because that seemed to be the only way people were ever going to accept someone after Tennant. Instead, Moffat defied expectations and went the opposite way with his decision, which would become a trend during his entire run. Only in this instance, it defied even his own expectations. Moffat originally wanted an older actor for the Doctor, given that the Doctor really had not been played by an older actor since Pertwee. Around the time he was auditioning for the role, he was also auditioning for Sherlock. So when Matt Smith arrived to audition for Sherlock, not even Moffat could have realized how things were going to go that fateful day. Matt Smith just kept blowing the competition out of the water. Reportedly, he was one of the earliest people to audition, and no matter how many more actors came after, Moffat just kept gravitating back to Smith. So when the announcement came that this 26-year-old actor was to become the youngest actor to assume the role, effectively dethroning Peter Davison, who was 29 when he took it, the whole world aptly joined together with a resounding who? Because prior to this, Matt Smith was a little-known but respectable actor, earning plaudits for series like Party Animals, and for his supporting role alongside Billie Piper in The Ruby and the Smoke, and even a one-off appearance in Secret Diary of a Call Girl. So Billie Piper was quick to voice her enthusiasm for Smith's casting, which did reassure some fans. And frankly, his magical hair helped too. Seriously, that is one coif of the gods. It defies the laws of nature. But like every Doctor before him, ultimately the true test of Smith's merit in the role would come with the first episode. And, well, for that matter, the same for Stephen Moffat. For all intents and purposes, it was like the show was starting all over again, where Russell T Davies' sensibilities veered more towards, character drama and overt allegory. Stephen Moffat was more about whimsy, labyrinthine plotting, and wit. In Russell T Davies' run, he let the characters dictate the story, and Moffat was the opposite. He let the story mold the characters. Which method worked better? Honestly, when it comes to Doctor Who, that doesn't matter. Doctor Who is a show that has changed itself so many times, it's less of a matter of which way is the best way, and more about whether or not it's a way at all. And the debut episode, The 11th Hour, was going to be a solid early indication of that idea. Where this episode lands in the pantheon of post-regeneration stories is honestly a subject for a ranking video, which I refuse to do given that my opinions may change as the future Doctors come and go. Yes, opinions do that. However, I can confidently proclaim, even after 10 years, The 11th Hour is still one of my favorite debuts of a Doctor. Right out of the gate, it is clear that Matt Smith is going to be a Doctor whose eccentricity was going to be writ large for all to see. Which, for when I first saw him, was actually quite refreshing. Many of the prior Doctors, particularly Davison, McGann, Eccleston, and Tennant, they kind of kept their alien nature to themselves. If even you saw them walking past on the street, the only hint of their otherworldly nature would be their wardrobe. Smith, on the other hand, in his first 10 minutes of popping out of the TARDIS, in this episode he's eating fish fingers and custard, which, by the way, it's delicious. While he definitely has the energy of Tennant, he channels it into a performance that is more nuanced, and has levels that are decidedly less spiky, and because of this, more graceful transition, he was much more unpredictable. Juxtapose this with his repartee with young Amelia Pond, and we see another nuance which we actually never got to see too much of, even in the prior eras of the show. The Doctor with kids. If there's one thing Moffat consistently did well was writing scenes where the Doctor interacts with kids. Moffat just understood the way children look at the Doctor. They see him as something of a Willy Wonka figure. Ostensibly an adult, but against all odds, is able to communicate with kids in a way that kids are able to connect with him. And while there would be many wonderful interactions to come, I don't think they've ever been able to top 11 with young Amelia Pond. But that's not the only win of this episode. This is easily one of the most unrelentingly breathless episodes when it comes to pacing. When this episode gets moving, it never stops. And in lieu of that, Moffat is still able to find moments for the Doctor and a now-grown Amy to connect and give audiences moments that range from wildly hilarious to thrilling to, well, incredibly beautiful, and yet never loses focus on the core story it's telling. It does an amazing job of establishing this Doctor by whittling him down to his essence. Commonly, the Doctor uses the TARDIS, but the TARDIS is inoperable. The sonic screwdriver is commonly used as a get-out-of-jail-free card, but here it's knackered and ultimately destroyed. Now, the Doctor has to actually use his wits and utilize the limited resources Ledworth has to offer to save the world. A common problem with the limited runtime of the new series is that the more complex stories tend to come off as incomplete due to the, omitting scenes for runtime, making many of the stories feel fragmented. Here, the threats of Prisoner Zero and the Atraxi are simple, direct, the parameters of how they operate are established well enough that the episode can take their gaze off of them long enough to focus the relationship of Amy and the Doctor, and even her put-upon boyfriend Rory. Even then, the focal threat is never far from their minds, or even ours. This is the one Doctor-companion dynamic that is truly forged in a trial by fire, and it runs the gamut between being chased by a toothy, pre-Broadchurch Olivia Colman, and even getting forced into a comatose state. I suppose now would be the time to talk about Karen Gillan. Now, firstly, she's another in an increasingly long line of Doctor Who actors who got cast in a larger role after appearing in prior episodes, but she has a rare distinction that her post-Who career has seriously outshined her origins, and deservedly so. She is a wealth of talent, and her range is abundant, and the 11th Hour declared her presence to the world with the utmost authority. While Amy is not one of my favorite companions, I will say that a lot of the charm of her character came from Gillan herself. The concept of the character is established so damn well in this first episode, it's refreshing to have a character who isn't 100% perfect. When we meet Amy as a grown-up, she's emotionally turbulent, she's rambunctious, and antagonistic, not in an annoying Australian flight attendant way. What's worse is that it's all because of her one night with the Doctor that culminated from a promise that he failed to keep. A promise that affected her so severely that she was a social outcast, and even had the pangs of Arrested Development. Amy wanted to fly off with the Doctor through time and space, and Everyone considered her to be crazy. While I'll save some of my analysis of the character for future reviews to come, I'm gonna say yes, even though Amy isn't one of my favorite companions, I definitely consider her to be one of the most perfectly fleshed out in the history of the show, and this episode was a solid start to that. The 11th Hour is an episode that is something of a spectacular juggling act. It has to establish a new doctor, a new companion, a new aesthetic, set up a story arc for the season, more on that in later videos, and still tell a fun, thrilling, and engaging story all at the same time. One could even interpret that the story of the 11th Hour is designed to be a parallel to the difficulties a showrunner has in taking up the responsibility of running a show. Well, a show like Doctor Who. Moffat has an entire mythology on his shoulders, and he has to preserve that, while the ominous eyes look down upon him, ready to burn him at the slightest provocation. And in lieu of that, it's his responsibility to take the show to new places, with new ideas and new faces. And even more difficult, Moffat has to do it within an insanely short runtime. I just came to this conclusion as I'm recording this. In fact, the beginning of the episode with young Amelia could be interpreted as a parallel to the first time a child discovers Doctor Who, perhaps even a metaphor for when Moffat, among others, were children, enjoying the show in their youth, but when the show was cancelled, cynics were treating Doctor Who fans like shit for loving the show. Then the show came back, and suddenly Who fans felt like children again. And gradually, as Amy grew as a character, it was akin to how older fans grew with the show and shared it with their kids. In fact, what if River Song is a metaphor for, you know what, wait, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I think I should save that for future reviews. In the meantime, I'll leave you with my final statement that in the pantheon of Doctor debut episodes, the 11th Hour may very well be among the best. And with the revelations that I've experienced right now, I may even be bold to say it's the best Doctor debut. So, do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that this was a brave new start for Doctor Who? Or do you think this is the start of the show's downfall? People, the show survived far worse than you can imagine. I think things are still doing fine. Like, share, subscribe, click. Thou shalt be served.